Before we start, a quick reminder to hit the subscribe button. Only 4% of my channel is subscribed. What doesn't burn? Apologies, your call could not connect. Please try again. I cut the connection with a shaking hand. The last several days didn't feel real. The cyber attack, the communications blackout, Venlil Prime, Fall, the ships, them. We knew they were coming. When our communications crashed, the lights darkened on the surface, and the subspace rippled in agony, it only meant one thing. It didn't prepare us for the hundreds of dagger-like vessels that materialized out of nothing, burning hard for here. Home. I tried to call again. Nothing. The cradle was supposed to be safe, yet they got here, down here. The blood that ran through the gutters was red and blue. People that I could have saved. If I acted sooner, I tried again. Nothing. Jelia, pick up. I almost didn't realize the shuttle stopped until I felt others walking down the aisle. I shook my head and stood on shaky legs. The air smelt wrong. Lyran Orchard usually brimmed with scents of blooming Aper and Elita flowers, the coming of spring. It was still there, now with hints of sulfur, soot, and ozone just underneath. The shuttle stopped down the road from the main town, but haze caught the sunlight and cast everything a dull orange. I felt my chest tighten, but I felt no urge to run. They wouldn't come here. It's too far out of the way. But they had. They did. I set down the road as the shuttle pulled off. I tried again. Nothing. They're okay, I caught myself whispering, but everything said to the contrary. People I passed going the other way all carried glassy looks. Some wore aprons matted with soot and dust, sometimes blood. Others looked pristine, the only tell of something wrong born on their face. Most were heading out of town, most likely from the local shelter. I was one of the few going in. Home was just past the town center. Coming over the crest of a hill, another call failed, and Lyran laid itself out. The town center was a below-ground plaza, with shops and services filling in the embankments that weren't cut for the winding. Streets. It bustled with activity on a normal day, and bustled with activity now. Only now, even from a distance, I could see the soldiers milling about, and the lines of white bags that could only mean one thing. Armored vehicles rolled down the paths normally meant for children on school days and market-heading shoppers, tons of steel threatening to crush anyone in their way. In the distance, fields and orchids burned in a great firestorm, sending black. Pillars of soot reaching for the twin moons. Otherwise, it was home. I could barely make out the mound only a couple 100 yards from the fire front. She wouldn't be there. She would have taken Hania to the shelter at the first sign of trouble. She would just be waiting in the town center. She would pick up. I took a deep breath and started walking again. Stumbling down the path, eyes watering from the soot and dust, I tried another call. Nothing. Homes to the left or right seemed perfectly undisturbed or burned out. Soldiers went to and fro, patrolling, checking homes, hauling bodies, gojid or otherwise. When I was growing up, they were almost considered normal. The uplift was going well, and they were integrating with the Federation almost without issue. The Kolshians raised their normal concerns, but everyone brushed them aside because they were the Kolshians. They were always raising concerns. For everyone else, a gray on the street didn't seem too out of place. That was before the famine and their betterment. Before all this. I tried again. There was a gray on the street now. It was the first time I'd seen one in person since I joined the fleet. It was dead. The first thing I noticed was the bone. I could see the rib plates pressing up through the flesh where the sheet didn't cover. Even in death, its eyes almost seemed to convey a maddened starvation, a desperation for sustenance no matter the source. It was impossible to ignore the dried blue on the teeth and lips. Then there were the scars. They were naked, spare a bandolier and a belt, leaving the cuts and gashes pink against the tar-like flesh open to view. They were everywhere. It was impossible to tell whether it was the product of years or a day. But it didn't matter much now. Then the smell. It wasn't of the rot I was used to. They were aliens, composed of different cells, infested by foreign bacteria. What consumed them now would pay me no mind if I dropped dead this instant. Yet the smell was sweet, inviting, and unmistakably one of rot. It felt wrong that any part of this hell could pretend to be something so comforting as the aromas of Talip's pastry stall on a lazy summer afternoon, but it was there, right in front of me, coming off the thing stained with the blood of someone I probably knew. Maybe it was Talip or Tellin or... I tried again. "Hey, step away from that!" a voice called as the connection failed again. I turned to see it was a soldier, uniform streaked with soot, fur matted where the helmet didn't hide. "Don't want to catch whatever shit that gray had in them." "Oh, I didn't know," I said, awkwardly stumbling back from the corpse. "Not likely we can catch any bug they have, but we're not taking any chances. The last thing I need is to die from some gray cough after all this shit." They gestured to the world before fully rolling the sheet over the rest of the body. I still felt its gaze through the white tarp. They turned back to me, and their eyes lit up with recognition. "Hey, I think I know you. Aren't you that captain?" "Pardon?" "The guy who led that charge? The only reason we're not dead. Right now?" "Sovlin, right? Yes?" I coughed. "I'm not a captain, just an officer. You'll be a captain after what you did. Everyone thought we were dead to rights before you pulled that suicidal shit." "It was suicidal. I didn't know word got around. Did you hear me? You're the only reason we're alive right now. Of course everyone's heard of you. I'm surprised they even let you come here. Why are you here?" I live. Here." Their ears dropped. "Oh," it felt mocking. "Oh, sorry your home's trashed. Nothing else to do besides seeing if your family is dead. But at least you're famous now." I showed the soldier a photo from a vacation last summer. "Have you seen my partner and daughter, Jelia and Hania?" They shrugged. "Apologies. Not from here. Can't say. Of course you're not from here. You don't have any stakes in this place. You're just here to pick up the pieces and pat yourself on the back. Oh, what a good job I'm doing. Wrapping up the corpses and cleaning off the blood. Maybe they'll give me a medal for this one to show off to the folks. Oh, sorry about your daughter's blood spattered across the common room wall. But hey, at least you're famous." "Thank you." I tried again. There was another one by the corner of an embankment. It wore an actual uniform and armor and seemed filled out where the sharp scales showed. One of the ones they thought worthy, I guessed. The town square was the morgue for the day. Row upon row of bodies draped in plastic, waiting to be transported. My stomach wound in knots at the prospect of checking to see a face I knew staring back. But I had to do it. There was still a chance. A chance. Several others had taken it already, I could tell. They were crying under the awning of Gallup's tailoring business. No, they're not there. I looked at the milling crowds. They were locals, people I knew. All looked like they belonged in a different world. The world before now. Some stared up at the tumbling smoke from the fires. Others looked through the shop windows, checking what could be salvaged before it burned. Most just stared blankly ahead. None of them were them. I turned to the center. To the bodies. They're not there. I walked up to the first laid out and pulled back the tarp. It was Ilip. They were one of the young hands from Letip's orchard, burning down now. I'd talked to them a couple of times. They seemed happy, maybe a little talkative, but they carried a good sense of humor. I thought I could still see it in the glass of their eyes. I swallowed something down and moved on. Irlit was next to them. They were older, 20 years my senior. They were a writer, small-time, penning romances that usually appeared on the stands at major spaceports. Nothing groundbreaking. No one famous. Unlike me, the one who saved the cradle. I would have to check if unfinished manuscripts lay around. Their home. If their home still stood at the end of the day. If it still stood at all, Kelton. Another farmhand, one I never got the chance to speak to. They were just like that. Quiet. Even when they were Hania's age. I never heard him talk. And now I never would. Someone I didn't know. Older, with the tips of their quills and hairs just beginning to gray. This one had the first visible wound, a large gash on the neck that cut to the throat. Maybe it was and the rest down the torso were just for their sick entertainment. It could have been the last one they made. It didn't matter. The blood was dry now. Another one. A teenager. They didn't even bother removing the apron. Tearing. Straight through the fabric and the ribs. I had been able to ignore the smell up to that point, but the open cavity where their chest once was brought something up I couldn't swallow back down. Whatever meager meal I had earlier came out over the tile, until my stomach felt like a tightly wound knot. Tears fell and disappeared in the sick. Hey, are you... Oh, God's blessing, Sovlin. I saw someone rush over from the corner of my eye. Standing from my kneel, I caught that it was Talip. The old baker took me under the arms and lifted me to my feet. Their apron was dirty, with streaks of blood and dirt and God's knows what else, but they were alive. I didn't think you would come so quickly, they said, brushing off my shoulder. After what you did, I thought they would... Are they okay? I asked with renewed urgency. Talip was alive. Where are they? Did they come to the... shelter? I don't know. I grabbed her by the shoulders. What do you mean you don't know? I didn't see them come to the shelter, Sovlin, I swear. She stepped back, fear reflected in her eyes. I don't know. A lot of people stayed home when the power went out. They thought it was just a blackout until they came. Did? You... They're not here, she said, sniffing. I already checked. They're not here. I look at the bodies lined up, row by row. Relief flooded through me, then dread. I looked in the direction of home. I need to go find them. Talip grabbed my hand. They won't allow us on the north side, not with the fires. They said it could spread, and I wrenched away from her grip. Her ears drooped in shock, but she didn't say anything else. Stay safe, I said without saying, before turning heel and breaking into a run. Liran was a small town, but it was clear now that it didn't matter. They wanted everything. Every city and every town, every last mother, son, father, and child for their sick experiment of betterment. And they almost took all of it, if not for me. They were alive because of me, dead because of me. The world was burning down because of me, still standing because of me. Hania and Jelia were safe because of me, or dead because of me. And I turned another corner. The fires had grown closer, the smoke, now the sky, and the soot, now the air I pulled with every shaking gasp. Gojid were never meant to sprint. Never. Meant to jog, never meant to save a world or condemn it to burn, but they forced that on us. And now all that was left was them. I turned another corner. Sparks and embers bounced across the pavement, and the heat blew in with the wind. My legs felt weak, and every breath started to feel like agony. They were just a block down, yet I could only stagger across the final stretch. I made one final turn, and I was home. The front door had been kicked in, reduced to a splintered mess across the entryway. The lights were off, but I could already see the furniture overturned in the darkness. The floor was covered in dirt and dust and scattered belongings. Too many to count, too many to care. Parts of the plaster had cracked, letting soil from the surrounding ground fall to the floor. I stepped inside. Jelia? Nothing. No response. It was quiet. Peaceful. The air was cool. If not for the carnage, I could close my eyes and pretend. Nothing was wrong. Jelia? Nothing again. The common room was empty. Love? The kitchen was empty. Hello? The hall to the bedrooms was no different. I had to step around knocked-over shelves to get to the guest room. It was empty. The main bedroom. Our bedroom. Empty. There was just a blue stain on the floor. I knelt. It was just a blue stain on the floor. Blood. That was all. Hard. To see in the darkness among the blankets strewn across the floor. Just a little bit of blood in an empty home. It meant nothing. Jelia was fine. Hania was fine. It was all okay. I got up to my feet and stepped across the hall. Hania's room was disheveled. Her crib was knocked over. Toys were strewn across. The floor and tiny aprons with cartoon animals and floral patterns spilled out of the destroyed dresser. Orange-stained light poured through the window. Hania was gone. Not even a blue stain. I closed my eyes, and nothing was wrong. I breathed in, and I breathed out. In and out. In and out. It was all just okay. I was choking on tears before I hit the floor, splayed out, convulsing and gargling like my throat had been cut, the weight of everything pressed on me at once. The way the world had once been, the one I hoped she would grow up in, the one I thought we'd spend the rest of our lives sharing, was gone. It was laid out in the courtyard, burning down outside the window, and a blood stain on the floor. I was supposed to die so they could live, and fate had dealt me this, and there was no mercy, no finality, no bodies to bury or burn, just empty spaces where lives were once lived, memories, feelings only I had experienced. A future that only I could imagine. I had to carry that, lest it meant nothing. And I was a hero now. They would shower me with medals, write books and shows and movies about me, and my sacrifice and my heroism, and all the other shit that didn't matter one single iota. If that was payment for their lives, for that future, then it was no payment. It was a mockery. The old future was gone, and the old world was burning down. I decided I would burn with it. Wiping away the tears, I lay down on the floor. I stared up at the ceiling, the one me and Jelia painted together. It was a cartoon star map of the Federation. It was a little cliché, but we had hopes. We hoped that Hania would get to see the galaxy as we did when we were young and stupid. We hoped that she could be young and stupid like we were. We hoped that we could be there to pick her up when she stumbled, that we could bring her into a better world. Now that was... My ear perked. There was a sound just to my left. It was small, barely above the silence of the room. But it was there, something crying, someone crying. I shot up to my feet. The sound came from the closet, a mess of knocked-over shelving and old stuff thrown inside to gather dust. I scrambled over and desperately clawed for the source of the sound, to no avail. It was then I realized that it wasn't coming from the closet. It was coming from behind the closet, behind the only bit of shelving not tipped over. I wrenched it aside to see a small hole dug through the plaster into the soil on the other side. It was clear that it was dug out by hand. It created a small cubby lined with blankets, where she lay, wailing. Hania. I gently slipped my hands underneath her, trying to control my shaking, and lifted her. I looked over her completely once, 3 times, 5 times, until I was sure she was perfectly okay. She was. There was not a blemish, cut, or scar, just her mother's fur and my eyes. All the tears came back as I gently stroked her forehead, quills just barely beginning to come in. She had stopped crying and almost appeared to smile as she looked up at me. Despite everything, she could still smile. I was smiling too. "It's okay," I whispered. "I'm here now." It wasn't okay. Nothing was okay. But now, as the world burned down, I could pretend, at least for a moment. No, I could hope that Jelia was out there, that she would come home, and that Hania could see that future we promised her. It's going to be just all right. Cascade is an open world-building project centered around a nature of predators, AU. As part of that, I've been making one-shots surrounding characters to appear in the upcoming main story. I'll be bringing them over to HFY gradually, starting with this one here, centered around Sovlin. If you want to contribute to the project, you can find a link to our Discord here. If you want to look into the proper lore series, you can find that on both the NOP Reddit and HFY under the name Notes from a Distant Archive, which will be linked down below. Enjoy next story? They laugh like we do. Having grown to adulthood, or as far as anyone cares to draw the line, Yinny had known many things. Mix these for a healing balm, pick grass to twist into strings, meat goes over a fire to become tasty. Sure, nothing really covered being lost in a cave, but he knew what to do broadly. Move upward, eat things that tried to blend in, avoid things that don't move or look too bright. He didn't know much about goblins, or about water that burned and wasn't for drinking, but that didn't stop him from burning the dark water and eating. The goblins. There were no roots to nourish his more passive hunger, and it ached his belly. But the mushroom roots in the good water spots were good ebuff. Stranded as he was, away from the coarse cleaning sands of the great pointed hill, the oil and dirt of the underplace clung to him like infection. The great solace of this place was that things came out of the dirt to eat it away. But they came none too gently, and too often took fur or hide with them. At least their mouths are too small to bite deep, but if they used their pincers... Well, no use dwelling on what doesn't matter. Those things are far away, and a pale goblin cares for him now. It mostly grouses to itself while sorting through dull sheets of hide, all sewn together, occasionally presenting a bowl or flask of some concoction. Most are bad. Most that seem good don't pass the berry or mushroom tests, but slowly, so slowly, more are good. Yinny just has to sit back, and he is doted upon by small pale goblins until the normal ones sum back to break things. Then he goes to hunt. Not a single small one accepts the flesh of their kin, but clearly have no hard feelings for his rabid. Consumption, they clean him with water and stone, then continue to groom him after as they find new tinctures to help. One would help him heal, another could flow lightning in his blood, a third might make his whole skin a coat of stone. All helpful, enjoyable even. But a hunter that hunts for only one prey is useless if they ever run dry. The pale goblins hunt for themselves, but are weak and small, as all goblins are, but they use a cunning to trap and a guile to whittle their every foe to exhaustion. A hyena can respect the adaptation, but a true hunt is to fight, to break down a creature so it can't. Flee, can't call, can't even fight back, until it can't move or breathe, so he looked, and found those things again. They repulsed him as he looked, even lean and gleaming as they were, like river stones on twig legs but as big as his thigh. They could be drawn out by the sucker in their flying cousins' hives. They could be pried apart with claw and grit, but to little end as their insides, while edible, are utterly detestable. Gorged too long on the easy meals of dirt, their shell is like bark over a smellier first, and when bitten, dirt. It took fire to make them taste like something half decent, but then they just tasted like metal. The flying ones had no meat to speak of, and he didn't want to fight a swarm even with the stone skin. Too much effort for too little result. The next were the land fish. They were normal fish, but down under the ground they could swim in the air. He knew they could swim into the dirt to eat roots and bugs. That's why reeds and trees were used to section off gardens. But apparently, they could use the same ability to lift themselves into the air to nibble at the cave walls. One did not walk. The caves without them either fleeing like birds or bursting from soft soil attempting to gulp at you. Clearly, the goblins had adapted and armored their limbs with sturdy shells, tucking their torsos away behind big pads of mushroom root. But hunting these was either a waiting game or hoping for an ambush. Too trying on his patience either way. So it went for everything else the pale goblins could show him. Eels were like snakes, but only cared about fish. Bats were rats, but lived in a gas cloud. Goyles were like lions, but stone-skinned. Crabs exist. Nothing was really all that good to hunt until he got really far from the bad water, and the pale goblins wouldn't go unless he helped them set up a new camp, which they despised. No cave too secure or close by. No ground too soft or smooth, these creatures hated moving, and once he had got them started, it was like a boulder had started rolling. They poked at every cave no matter how risky, tread the most treacherous ground they could find, ate the dumbest things, and insisted on sharing all of it with him. Yinny felt like a little cub again, clumsy and tired, stumbling every step and dirty to no fault but his own. Hunting became as escape, a way to feel sure of himself and competent again. He found new things to hunt as they traveled, creatures like moving bushes that wrapped around and wrestled your limbs, furred centipedes, whose antlers came front its head and every single leg it had. A thing covered in sharpened fish scales that had the most delightful urge to pick through grime and lick up filth. Soon, they could even see the sky. Vast caverns opened to the air above, mounts and hills forming at their centers, as streams trickled in and carved longer rifts down into the earth. The scabbed borders of these open wounds were little more than boulders held onto by tree roots, and hung a concerning distance in over the cave floor. Once they found a small one with a stream too small for big trees or fish, they settled. First, it was just him sleeping under the stars trying to remember which was which until he fell. Then they started grooming the open cave. He showed them how to twist and weave grasses as they made ropes to climb to the surface, then showed them a true hunt with a zebra. Now they whispered their names for stars into his ears and showed him weaves he could never imagine. Sheets of solid cloth pulled between the trees sheltered their small camp and gave them water with the morning dew when he told them of floods. They shifted and rebuilt the camp a whole shoulder height off the ground, bringing in big boulders to act like trees so they could lounge in the canopy of their own making. It was so long he'd almost forgot about his people when playing with the bigger of the goblins. They heckled and jeered like birdsong, but he knew they didn't hunt that way. His old pack rushed in, blood on their lips and yowled like trees breaking. He had to gather up the pale goblins behind him while interceding between them and his packmates. Pride welled in his at the proper pointing of spears, and the lacking of those basal rodent screams. Instead, he could focus on placating people he only barely recognized. Jarl stepped to the fore, glaring down at him with that entitled, imperious look that made everyone else shy away. You herd these scavengers after they hunt you? Are you gardening them? Is their meat worth the effort? She spoke like she expected to partake, like there was barter to be had. He stood tall and looked her in the eyes for a solid 10 beats before looking around at the area. No, their meat is goblin meat. Their minds are fey, though, and I hunt richly off their scheming. I have seen things mightier than you felled by rope and cut like scraps. He was no Lil Yinny anymore. He had lived on his own and lived with far. Greater dangers than a glaring female. The pale goblins were not idle, though. A few had donned their full gear while the rest stood ready to drink a concoction he dare not guess. Jarl scoffed, more indignant scoff than anything. What is a fey mind with the flesh of scavengers to call home? I say we partake of them for the insult of hunting you, one of ours in hide and heart. With a gesture the potions were downed, and suddenly he felt shadows loom over him, then a growl like an angry herbivore or a rock slide. Only the tightly strained modesty of the previously billowing pants remained as a clue to who they were. There was a long silence before he turned back to his back. They may not hunt like us, they may even be scavengers, but when they fear for their own blood, stones may learn to walk. He spoke slowly and with deliberate clarity, lest the female be confronted with her own smug superiority, backed by the same disproportionate force. Jarl looked small. All the hunters did. They shrank, back as did even he. Then one of the behemoths shook, then grinned without a snarl. It leaned back and jeered to the sky, sounding to all the world as a great gleeful bird before scooping him up into his arms and enveloping him into the softest thing he'd ever felt. He felt the words though the chest of this new great creature as it spoke. Look, more hunters? Let's make friend and add to camp. Talk like Yami so can hear. Yinny groaned. He would have taken the fight over being small again. It's more new story, the many-eyed beast. Bars and stations are vibrant things. Tales from halfway across the galaxy delivered firsthand are almost always outlandish or captivating, but the sparknet dulls them after the fact. Moff could say in his time of tending the bar, he'd never found a tale so ephemeral before. It was a normal day, anytime a passenger liner docked there, where new characters who filtered through. Some he saw once, a few he saw every day, and one of those dailies for this wave was an old veteran. The man glanced about, curled around his drink most of the time, and utterly refused not to jump whenever addressed for the first week. When he could eventually be bribed to open up, he told a tale fit for a thriller. His deployment was to finish uprooting an upstart empire before it really got an ingrained identity to it. The standard fare in their small galaxy, everyone who thought they were big just needed to look over to Milky Way or Andromeda to crush that notion. So they fortified when some wayward commander took a price of industry and planted a different flag. It was standard practice to surround them and slowly inch inward. Quiet operations to remove or expose as many personnel as practical and put them to work elsewhere in the Empire. This guy was one of those who'd sneak around, eyes wide, looking for anyone and anything that could be quickly sequestered, kidnapped from the breakaway force and reintegrated elsewhere. They had taken the perimeter systems fine enough. There were battles, but nothing visible from orbit. Clean by the standards other tales told, a second layer of systems put up resistance, detecting the inclusion far easier and requiring standing forces to keep the civilians from using some primitive arms. Fighting happened, not in set battle lines, but in counter incursions. The entire planet could be painted in a camouflage pattern if you tried to map out the battle lines, and gods help you if anyone received anti-air munitions. Nara, the apparent escapee, had been a third-wave soldier received via capital ship to the most consistent stronghold the Empire had on the one planet he was working in. Local commanders instilled a sense of always being watched, to always speak in codes and never salute or honor your superiors. Then he'd gone and lasted long. Enough to find out why. Sometimes they'd disappear. The officers simply didn't show up when they were supposed to, and anyone who followed the routine vanished soon after. Other times, piles of refuse and scrap had eyes. Lumps somewhere in their mass had shifting arrays of lenses, each one a different size and lacking any logic to it. You could see dozens on a patrol, and never would they move unless you moved on them. Any scrutiny would be repaid by a projectile from another direction, fired past or into you with no discernible source. Violence would be met in turn as the creature. Within roused in a hail of concussive blasts and turned the nearest offenders into wet confetti. Then the others along that street would rouse. Battles started that way were chaotic and vicious. The skies blotted out with acrid smoke and ash like a volcano went off. Shadows of ships both sleek and timorously bloated would bring that smoke down onto them until everyone was done shooting. The bodies of these assailants, these plants, the observers, were sometimes collected for examination. It was known they had 4 limbs and a torso, all of comparable length, with a head on top, and that the hiding ones were always different to each other and the ones who came out to fight. But any time they'd been taken back to base, they either disappeared with the transport or vanished from inside the base. No piece of their gear, nor part of their underlying body was ever captured beyond the smallest, most insignificant fragments. So Noon knew what was under all that. Their kit became their skin in the eyes of everyone on the ground, a great loose hide of nylon and ballistic putty that bleed iron blood and sparked with static power, dropped over ivory bones and rubber muscle. Great scabs of blocky plastic instruments burst with electrolyte and fighting and collected great piles of debris in peace. The only sign that one was around being a steady thump, almost imperceptible, long humid breaths that made the whole city. Fog up and a pile, a random assortment of lenses and windows with no logic or sense to them, watching your every move. It explained why the guy got startled by, or glared at cameras, since his species had evolved to identify other creatures by the light reflected from their eyes. Anything with a lens lit up for him like a candle. Evolution taught him to recognize pairs and accept singles. Nara's retwellings had the whole bar trying to figure out what the things could be, who they might be from, but nothing came back. It had the whole bar wondering what sort of third party had gotten involved. As for the man himself, he was on the planet for a whole year. Dozens of battles caught in streets choked with soot and ozone, only to see every familiar face vanish or be torn away. He smuggled himself out on a capital ship that docked planet-side to drop off more conscripts like him. He was finally settling, down halfway across the galaxy, and had absolutely no will to do anything but run from another fight like that. So Moff was alarmed by the very skeptical look a small freight engineer was giving the veteran as he tried explaining how the creature looked to him. He almost intervened when the young kid opened his mouth. In retrospect, he probably should have. Because putting a name to the creature didn't help the trauma or search results. Just how in the hell a rat gets to rival the size of an apex predator is baffling. Hey everyone! If you enjoy these epic HFY stories, don't forget to subscribe. Hit the like button and drop a comment below to let us know your favorite part or what stories you'd love to hear next. Your support keeps the channel growing and the stories coming. Thanks for being part of the